All right. I want to bring in our panel on this. Tom Doherty, former advisor to Governor George Pataki, now a partner with Mercury National Public Affairs firm, and Evan Stavisky, a Democratic strategist partner at the Parkside Group. President said today, listen, powerful forces on the other side opposing this are trying to run out the clock. Fairly or not, as I asked, they've waited too long, or whether they couldn't get it done. Support is starting to ebb on this thing. It's going to be harder to get something done today or in April than it is or was in the weeks after the tragedy, right?
Look, unfortunately, numbers are somewhat fluid on this. Most people support a certain set of common sense things, such as background checks, closing the gun control loophole to make sure that dangerous people don't have weapons. But unfortunately, those numbers spike after a tragedy, and there were a lot of tragedies last year. There was the one in Connecticut, there was the one in Wisconsin, you name it. There was just, unfortunately, it seemed like every week there was another tragedy on the news, and that really drove a national debate. Thankfully, there hasn't been one for a while, and ironically, that means that people aren't necessarily thinking about this and they're not as motivated anymore.
Were you surprised, though, Evan? From my end, Harry Reid, shame on him. At the end of the day, the NRA blessed the Senate that they were going to have an up and down vote. Now, if the Rand Pauls of the world were going to filibuster and the Ted Cruzes like they threatened, that's on them. But they could have gotten an up and down vote. Maybe he did a head count and Democrats weren't going to be with him in the numbers he needed, but at least I thought we were going to get that. Wasn't that the whole point of the national address by the president?
I mean, I would think that the purpose is actually to try to enact reform as opposed to simply put people on the spot for political purposes. The reality is, even if every Democrat voted for it, you wouldn't have 60 votes in the Senate. And it's also, I think...
But then at least you made them say they're filibustering it. And if public pressure is the only way you're going to get this thing done.
Completely. But I do think that, unfortunately, the NRA may say, yes, go to have an up and down vote, but they're sometimes a little disingenuous with the way they rile up the base and, drive some senators to want to avoid actually having to take a position on this.
Chuck Grassley's now put out his own proposal. And in it, he says, among other things, no expanded background checks for gun sales. He doesn't want an assault weapons ban, and he doesn't want a limit on high-capacity ammo magazines. Tom, the part I still don't get is the background check part. 90% of Americans and 3/4 of the NRA members believe in a comprehensive, across-the-board, universal background check. Why isn't this an easy thing to do, and why aren't Republicans risking it if they get behind something like this?
Well, I'll tell you why, because I think that the president made a very, very bad mistake. Is that we have talked about guns on this show at length, okay? Yep. And I still think that all of us who are fairly smart people, the complexity of the type of weapons, the capacities, et cetera, if you just focus on one simple thing, as the Attorney General of New York said, he went in, talked to the gun show owners, the guys who run the gun shows. It was simple. Common sense said, we don't want people with mental health issues to have weapons.
Right.
We don't want people who are on medication to have weapons. And the gun show owners don't want people, because the worst thing that could ever happen to somebody is a tragedy happens. Where'd you get your weapon? Oh, I bought it at the Westchester County Center at the gun show. That's horrible. It's horrible for the people involved and horrible for the gun show owner. So the president, with an 81% approval nationwide of individuals like myself who say background checks are simple. Check a person's background whether or not they should have a gun. That's what he should have focused on. Instead, he wants this to be a political debate that he knows it's very easy and it makes, Republicans look bad. The NRA, go attack the NRA. It doesn't get anything accomplished. And that's why compromise with this president has not been a very easy thing to do. He's done it recently with the dinners, et cetera, but all across the board, as you pointed out, Governor Cuomo in New York, his poll numbers dropped because what seemed to be a shove down the throat instead of a
You're
dialogue
right,
on
but
it.
He's still got some Republicans to sign on, and he's still got the thing
But
through.
this is, Richard, you have to remember, this is New York State. And this is a much different political environment than nationwide. New York is one of the most liberal states in the nation. If you can't pass it here, then you can't get it done anywhere.
Look, you had other states. Maryland actually took action too, but Governor Cuomo gets credit for moving this aggressively, moving it quickly. And there was compromise, but you really had a split. More than a Democrat-Republican thing, it was an upstate, downstate thing. There were almost no members from New York City or Long Island or the northern suburbs who voted against it in the state Senate, which is where passage was in doubt. And every senator from upstate New York, particularly on the Republican side, voted against it. Even some of the key lieutenants in the leadership broke with leadership to oppose passage of the legislation. It was very clearly an upstate, downstate thing because of the dynamics of the Republican conference in the Senate.
But to the point that both of you were saying, keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
If you do the background checks, the Republican plan still opposes it. Now, I get your point about assault weapons, and okay, but if you just do it on background checks, which the three of us can agree, whatever the politics are, it's crazy to let somebody who's got a mental illness, a restraining order,
Richard,
all these
but
things.
Richard, when you throw all the other issues in there, you don't focus on the background checks. And if you had just had the debate on the background checks, it's much harder for a Republican senator to defend that. When you drag all the other stuff in a comprehensive plan, you lose votes along the way. So I would have said, listen, let's do something we can agree on. Let's get that out of the way. And I think that they would have gotten that out of the way.
Do you think they will? You think at this point it's too late?
No, I think they will, because I think that the vast majority of Americans say, listen, we understand that people have a right to bear arms. And listen, the governor took a little grief in this state and lost numbers that ultimately were voters who were Republican voters who at the end of the day were not truly supportive of him anyway. They were looking for a way to say, we don't. But he did what he believed was right for New York. And that's why, you know, the Senate Majority Leader or co-president Skelos, et cetera, went along with it.
And they've pivoted. They've gone back from the stupid 7-clip thing to 10, and they've also made sure that your name will never be released in a paper and stuff.
And that's why what the Attorney General of the state of New York did, he deserves a lot of credit.
I got to get to my first break. Do you think at the end, though, we're going to see something pass?
I'm never optimistic that you're going to get compromise in Washington. Because look, even if you move it through the Senate, you still have the House to deal with. And whether you want to blame the president, as Tom does, or you want to talk about both sides bearing some responsibility, the folks in the House, it's a race to who can be least cooperative with the president, not who can reach a compromise.
Amazing that we don't even think we get something through at this point. All right, we're going to jump to a quick break. When we come back, we're going to turn to the big issue this week. And if you've been paying any attention to Washington, you know I'm talking about same-sex marriage. And for many gay couples around the country, well, we've been talking about the back and forth and reading the tea leaves with the high court. This is also about much more than just a right here, but about also people's lives. We're going to hear from one man about what it's like to live in a country that doesn't recognize his marriage. And later, with the new numbers about autism emerging, we're going to bring in a father's story about his son's life with autism. Please stay with us.